happened? He forgot about it. So the Torah opens up, and this week's Torah portion says, "Vayihi Miketz Shnasayim Yamim." It was after 2 years. Ufara Cholam v'hine Omed al Yahar, and Pharaoh is dreaming, and behold, what's his dream? That he's standing on the Nile. Okay, so we're going to get into the dream in a minute. But before we get into Pharaoh's dream, I would like to focus on the word Miketz, and it was the end of. Now, and if you look at the English translation, it says it came to pass at the end of 2 full years, which if you look at the Hebrew, it doesn't really seem to be saying that. It doesn't say Vayihi Achar Shnasayim Yamim or such thing. Okay. Now we know in the Torah, in the language of the Torah, if it would be that it was after 2 years, the Torah usually would use the language of Vayihi Achar. We see often the style of the Torah would be to say Vayihi Achar Devorah Ma'ela, and it was after these things, and this came to pass. But here it uses an unusual word, and because it uses an unusual word, we see that Rashi is going to give us the interpretation of the word, because as we mentioned many times, that Rashi says about himself, I come only to interpret this plain meaning of the verse. So Rashi starts off and he says, Vayihi Miketz, and it was the end of. And Rashi quotes the Targum. The Targum is Onkelos. Onkelos is the interpreter of the Torah in the Aramaic. And he says, Misof, at the end of. Okay, we know the word sof is end. So he says, V'chol lashon ketz sofu. Anytime we see the word ketz, it means end of. Okay, so it was at the end of 2 years, and we're told that this came to pass. So before we continue in this fascinating Torah portion, I would like to just take a few minutes and talk about this idea that it was the end of. Okay, because the Torah doesn't usually use this type of language, we derive a lesson. Anytime the Torah uses an interesting phrasing, it brings us to I guess an open into that phrasing. So here we have the idea that the Torah says that it was at the end of at the end of 2 years. And as I mentioned, it's not the normative language the Torah would use. So the word Miketz, Ketz is end, but it's literal end. You know, like it's not the language that you usually use. So the word Miketz means end. I saw a beautiful teaching from Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, and I would like to share with you about the idea of Ketz, that it was at the end of. And the reason I'm sharing it with you is because it just seems to be so in tune to what we are experiencing today as a society. Okay, so Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz says that we see that when we talk about it was the end of these 2 years, the end of these 2 years brought the beginning of Joseph's redemption. Yosef was waiting for these 2 years to end. He was sitting in prison. He had told the Sar Hamashkin, he had told the sommelier that he remember me to Pharaoh, and he's waiting. And what is he waiting? He's waiting for his sentence in jail to pass. Now remember that Joseph was in jail already for 10 years, so it's a long time to wait. And he feels, well, his deliverance is imminent. Now that he interpreted the dream of Pharaoh's servants, and one of them was released, he certainly will be remembered and he'll come out of jail very soon. So he is pining and waiting for the end. When is this going to be over? And Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz says that this is something that a lot of people want to know. We want to know when it's going to be over. So the Tehillim, King David talks about this. When will my troubles be over? You know, if I could just put an end date to my troubles, then I can breathe easy. But the fact that my troubles follow me all the time, and there's no end or seemingly end in sight, is creating a tremendous amount of tension in my life. I see this interpretation from my Steinsaltz, and I'm like, wow, isn't this what we're all experiencing? We're all saying, when is this craziness going to end? Just tell us a date. Just tell us, when will this end? And so Rabbi Yadin Steinsaltz says that the truth of the matter is that there is no date that we can talk about at the end of something, even though there is a date. And the reason we can't talk about it is for two reasons. One is that it could be very depressing to find out that our troubles are not going to be over so quickly. And the other is because in Torah lore and in Torah law and in our tradition, a designated end of trouble does not have to happen at that time. In other words, it could happen earlier. And we see this throughout Torah history. So for example, talking about the exile to Egypt, we find in the exile to Egypt that historically Abraham was told that your children will be in subjugation in Egypt, in a foreign country for 400 years. But yet, if you look at where the exile actually ends, you see that the exile ends after 210 years. The same is true when the Jewish people were exiled from Egypt. When they were exiled from Israel. When they were exiled from Israel, it said that they would be there for 70 years. But we see that the exile ends somewhat earlier. And so we have this concept that we can hasten the end of our troubles through acts of good deeds. As we know, we're told that tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah, mavirin et roah hagzeira, that fixing ourselves, correcting ourselves, tshuva, prayer, and good deeds can actually take away the severity of the decree and end the troubles earlier. So even though the troubles are meant to last longer, through our good deeds, the troubles last shorter. So for this reason, we are not supposed to kind of create an end, okay? And we see similarly that Jacob, the father of Joseph, when he dies at the end of the book of Bereshit, he brings his children together and he starts talking to them, and then the Torah shows us that he stops talking. And Rashi says there, what happened over here? What is this bringing together and the beginning of a conversation? And then he stops talking. And so Rashi says, Bikesh Yaakov legalas etzaketz. Yaakov wanted to reveal the end of days. He wanted to tell the Jewish people when their troubles would be over, and God withheld it from him. And similarly, we find that there's certain commentaries who wrote commentaries on the Torah. There were certain parts that they said, this I cannot comment on because it has to do with the revealing the end of the trouble, okay, the end of the suffering. And so the question is, why not? Why not get into the end of the suffering? And it's interesting. I found that in the Talmud there is a discussion about this, and I find it interesting, the language of the Talmud. I'm going to share that with you in a second. Hold on a second. Where are we? Yeah, here we go, Sanhedrin. So here we have Sanhedrin. The Talmud says, Kahada Rabzeira, Kahava Meshachik Rabbanan Demisake Be, Amar Lahem, Mamar Le, the Metusa, Beina, Menuche, Leiter Chaku, the Tanina, Gimel Ba'ayin, Behisa Hadas, Elohein, Mashiach, Metzia Ba'akra. Okay, so the Talmud says about this, that this is in that practice of Rabbi Zera, who, when he felt that the sages were engaging in discussion about the coming of the Mashiach, he would say to them, please, I ask you to delay, do not delay his coming by calculating the end of days. As we learn in the Baraisa, there are three matters that come only by means of diversion of attention from the matters, okay? That means there are three things that only happen when we stop getting focused on when they will happen. And these are they: Mashiach, a lost item, and a scorpion. Okay? Three things: Mashiach, a lost item, and a scorpion. So this interesting little piece of Talmud says basically that we should not get obsessed with the end of days because there's no point to it, especially it delays it. And what are those? Those are the Mashiach, losing something, and a scorpion. We know that, let's say when we lose something, I don't know if you had that experience, but when you lose something and you're looking for it and looking for it and looking for it, you cannot find it. The minute you forget about it, you seem to find it. So it's an interesting idea that don't get so obsessed, but what will happen, because that obsession is kind of pulling you away from it happening. Now it's interesting because we are told that about Mashiach, about the coming of Mashiach, Maimonides codifies actually 13 principles of faith. And in one of the 13 principles is a very famous Ani Mamin Be'emunah Shlema B'Viyat HaMashiach. I believe in perfect faith in the coming of Mashiach. And even though he may tarry, I still await his coming every single day. So to be a Jew is to have perfect faith in the coming of Mashiach, but not only that, not enough to have perfect faith that he will ultimately come, but to await his coming every day as if it will be today. And not only that, we learn that when a soul makes an accounting after 120 years, the Torah tells us that there will be different things that will be asked of the soul. And one of the things that will be asked, were you ethical in business dealings? Another thing that the soul will be asked is, did you wait for Mashiach to come? And the language that the Talmud uses is Tzipisa Yeshua. Did you anticipate every single day the coming of Mashiach? So here we have a kind of a dichotomy. We have an opposite idea that sits together with each other. One is, don't obsess about when it's all going to end. But on the other hand, part and parcel of being a Jew is to believe every single day that it can end. So what is the meaning of this? How do we understand the idea of case, the idea of wanting something to end? We want something negative to end and not becoming lost by it, not becoming dejected by it. And so the answer is that the answer is found in the Torah, which is this. What do we have to obsess about? We obsess about our own actions and how our own actions can help mitigate the situation. So, tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah, doing good deeds and praying and refining ourselves and making ourselves better people, and also having faith that it will happen. So not obsessing, is today the day it's going to happen, is today the day it's going to happen, is today the day it's going to happen, but to really just believe it's going to happen and not obsess by it. Because if you obsess about it, what it does is it's going to bring you down. And I think that, everything happens by divine providence. So I was looking at this teaching from Rabbi Steinsaltz, and I was thinking how apropos it is to the times that we are living in today, this idea of Miketz. Because what are we asking each other every single day? We're saying, when is this craziness going to end? And every time we thought that it's going to end here, the end marker was moved. We're out of the woods. Oh, there's a vaccine. Oh no, the vaccine is not available yet. It's not available for everyone. Oh, it's a double. Oh, now there's another variant. We don't know if it works so well with the variant. And then just a couple of days ago, I think it was, they were saying, oh, there's a new variant coming from Africa. Oh, by the way, everyone, if you were just going to be calm about this thing and say, okay, this is it. We're over the hump. We're getting past it. No time to be calm. There's a new variant that you could all get nervous about. And if we are looking constantly to say, when is this going to end? When is this going to end? my life is on hold because I need this to end, we find these kind of announcements completely disheartening, and they break our morale, they crush us, because it's like when you take kids on a trip and they're very young, what do they say the whole time? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Every minute that they're not there, they are really in pain. So what do you do in such a situation? You make the trip something that you look forward to. You bring games and snacks and toys. So that's true to pass the time, diversion. But more than passing the time, we have to see the opportunity in this difficulty and see where we can actually not only pass the opportunity, but become stronger through this opportunity. And that is very difficult. And there will be a time, and we know it's true, because King Solomon, the wisest of all men, said, Gam ze ya'avor, this too shall pass. And that is a truism. No matter what we think it is, and he said this is true for our happy moments and for our sad moments. This too shall pass. So ultimately it will pass. But the question is, when it finally does end, what will we have become as a result of enduring this craziness? Will it be that we will become bitter, tired, irritated, lifeless, completely devoid of any kind of hope or growth? Or will this be a time that we can tap into where we can find an opportunity to make this experience something that strengthens us and brings out our resilience? And then when it is over, we will rejoice, certainly, for the end of the tzara, end of the problem. But at the same time, we will be much more resilient as a result of having experienced it and not completely crushed. And the reason why the sages did not want people to talk about the Miketz, and we see this throughout different midrashim and throughout different interpretations of the Torah, that it's not good to focus on when exactly this date will happen. The reason for that is because we don't know ultimately when exactly something will happen. And if we become obsessed with a certain date, then when that date passes and we are not outside of our troubles, we become completely despondent, dejected, and unable to function. So the purpose of having this experience in the Torah, that Yosef is in this jail and he is waiting actively for the time of his redemption. Nevertheless, he was busy cultivating himself inside the jail and not just waiting and waiting and waiting. Because if you just wait for the end, if you just wait for the end,
what?
If you wait for the end, ultimately what happens is that you become consumed by it. And as time is going by, every single day is just a day that was wasted, a day that is not productive. And not only that, it becomes damaging to the person themselves. So when I saw this teaching from Rabbi Exile, I wanted to share it with you, because just a few days ago, when they said there's a new variant coming from Africa, no one knows what it is, we have to examine it. Israel is now quarantining anyone who comes in. And we're like, oh no, here we go again. Is this ever going to end? This is ridiculous. I mean, how long can this go for? And the answer is, we have to not pay attention to this, really. And if we find that it's becoming something that is bringing us down and it's depressing us and it's making us feel frozen, we have to turn it off. We have to minimize the input of all the discussion about Corona. Because at the end of the day, what happens is that we're living our life and our life is being constricted by it. So instead of it being something that constricts us, we have to find a silver lining. And not only that, we can find that there's a certain strength that we may have in this situation that we would not have had without the situation, or a certain activity or a certain action or maybe an opportunity that we may have, but we have to be open to it. We have to open our eyes and see it, and not look at the clock and say, how long more? I mean, we're now in the end of 2021, and that is when Corona started to. It's called COVID-19 at the end of 2019. So we're now 2 years. We're at the end of 2 years. That is what it says in this week's Torah portion. It was at the end of 2 years, and Joseph was remembered. So first and foremost, may this be truly the end of the 2 years, and may we go forward in an open and revealed good, and not have to deal with the worry of what this means and what this doesn't mean. And I personally believe in my kishkis, and in the bottom of my heart, I believe that we are actually on our way out. And when there's something that when we have darkness, it says that the darkness doesn't like to shake itself off so easily. It's like it holds on, like we see with Jacob when he was wrestling with the angel of Esau. He didn't want to let go. So just as it doesn't go out just like that. If there's always something, I'm going to hold on a little longer. But that being said, until we get the all clear, we have to live fully. We have to live fully as Jews. Today, so many people are afraid to go to shul. They're afraid to go to anything that has to do with a Jewish observance. It's almost like people will go to hockey games, but not to shul. Somehow, it's like it's an interesting thing because of the singing and the there's a togetherness that happens in a shul. Okay. But Judaism was not created in a shul and not transmitted in a shul. Judaism was created and transmitted first of all, it was taught in the desert, no temple. And we as Jewish people did not have a temple for 2,000 years. And now if we can't go to temple, or we can't go to shul, we can't go to our houses of worship, it doesn't mean that our Judaism is over. Our Judaism has to be full. So that means that we give tzedakah every day, that we say a little prayer every day, that we celebrate the holidays, maybe not in the same way because there's less chance to get together with a lot of people, but it could just be as meaningful as ever. And when we light the Hanukkah candles, we remember that we're part of a long chain that the Jewish people overcame so much to where we are today, and we will overcome. And so this is the message that I thought was so poignant and so touching when I was reading the teachings of Rabbi Steinsaltz. So I wanted to share that with you. That is the opening of today's Torah portion. Now,
Devorah.
Yes.
So I live in British Columbia, and we've seen fire and rain, a lot of fire and flooding. So so it's on top of the pandemic, there's also the fire and flooding. So I find that this is very timely that you're talking about this, because a lot of people, have been displaced and there's been a lot of issues. So thank you very much for trying to bring light into the darkness here, because it's just been very difficult for us here.
Well, I'm sorry to hear about, your challenges. It's displacement probably is one of the greatest challenges. We know that as a people. But indeed, I think the message of the Hanukkah candle is the miracle of one little light lasting for 8 days. It bespeaks a bigger idea, which is that all you need is a little bit of light. You don't have to have a lot to hold on to in order to give you the focus that you need and the joy that you need. And so I'll give you a suggestion. I'll give a suggestion to everyone here. And the suggestion is put on music if you're allowed to. Some people are in mourning, but if you're allowed to, put on music, play music, dance. These things change our reality, and we're told that to be a Jew is to live with joy. So Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha, serve God with joy. And let's not focus on when this will end. Rather, let's try to focus on making the most of the experience as we know it. And there may be a time we'll say, remember that time when I had the opportunity to do X, Y, and Z that I no longer do because now I'm back to a normal routine. And I think we have to find that opportunity. Someone asked, how did Yosef use his time? I don't know how Yosef used his time, but suffice it is to say that you see that Yosef did not become bitter. He did not become angry. He did not become obsessed about what happened to him. He never became a victim. He never dwelled on what his experiences were. Now we do find that Yosef will put his brothers through a ringer. And that is the next part of what I want to talk about in this week's Torah portion, is the fact that Yosef put his brothers through the ringer, and he's going to have this interaction with his brothers, which is not very pleasant. And I would like to take a deeper look on what Yosef was doing and why he was doing it. So let's get back into the Torah portion. What happens? Pharaoh has these two dreams. He has no interpreters. And finally, Yosef comes up, and Yosef brings the interpretation to the dream. But the Torah tells us something very interesting. It's so minute, we can almost miss it. But it's an important aspect. Let me just find the Miketz Torah reading. I don't know why my computer just does not, it's just a funny thing. I'm gonna try to see if I can find it on my screen. Here we go. I have to touch it for it to go for whatever reason. Okay, so we're here. We have the dream, and the dream of the 7 cows and the 7 fat cows, and they were eaten up by the 7 thin cows, and then the 7 pieces of stalks of ears of grain, and then the 7 thin grains that ate up the 7 fat grains, and so on and so forth. And Pharaoh is in a very bad mood, and he brings up Yosef. Okay, now this man remembers, the chief cupbearer remembers Joseph, and he mentions him to Pharaoh, and they bring him up out of the jail. And here we go. Vayishlach Pharaoh vayikra es Yosef. So they call Pharaoh. Pharaoh calls for Yosef. Okay, and if you look at the language here, vayirtzuhu min habar, they rushed him out of the dungeon. Okay, so he was in a bar in Hebrew means a pit. So he was literally under the ground. Okay, so when we talk about Yosef being in jail, he wasn't in a jail with a 9x6 cell with a little window. He was under the ground. Okay, no light, no vitamin D, nothing for 12 years. Okay, and they rush him out of the jail. Okay, and then we were told something very minor. And this minor teaching teaches us a lot about Yosef. It says that when he came out of jail, vayigalach, he shaved, vayichalev simleisav, and he changed his clothes. Vayavay al Paro. So he came out of jail, he shaved and changed his clothes, and he came to Pharaoh. So it's interesting, the commentators say that, why does the Torah mention this? The Torah mentions that Yosef was taken out of jail, he brought to Pharaoh, but the Torah puts 2 little things in. Oh yeah, before he got to Pharaoh, he got a haircut, and he got washed up, and he put on civilian clothes, he put on normal clothes. And the Medrash says that actually what happened was that they were in such a rush to have the interpretation of the dream that they rushed Joseph out of the prison. And you see the language, it says they rushed him out, they rushed him out of the prison. They rushed him out of the prison, and they wanted to bring him immediately to Pharaoh, because Pharaoh was losing his mind. He was going crazy. He was angry at everyone. He was blowing steam. They were like, bring this kid in already. Come on. This is crazy. Just bring him in. And Yosef said, no, not so fast. No, I need a haircut. I need a shower. I need a new set of clothes. I need to come to Pharaoh. And the Medrash says, why was Yosef so intent on that? Because he understood that the way he would be presented to Pharaoh would be to the extent that Pharaoh would take him seriously. So while they wanted to schlep him out of the dungeon looking like a wild man with hair that was who knows how long and dirty and unkempt, he said, no, I'm not going in front of a king that way. So Yosef never lost the dignity. All these years he's in jail, 12 years in a pit, dirty, filthy, with what type of people that surrounded him. And yet, when he's taken out, he doesn't lose his presence of mind. He says, I'm not a prisoner. I was in prison, but I was placed there, but I'm not a prisoner. I'm not a victim. Someone asked before, what was Yosef doing during this time? We have an inkling of where his mind is by the way that he behaved when he came out. We know that statistically, people who are incarcerated for a very long period of time do not do well when they try to integrate back in society. And often they end up back in jail because something happens to a person by losing their humanity and losing their personhood and losing their agency for so many years. Something breaks inside of them and they become a prisoner. They think like a prisoner, they act like a prisoner, they behave like a prisoner. And a prisoner behaves in a very unhealthy, almost existential way. They don't really live, they just exist. Yosef comes out of jail. He doesn't come out as a prisoner. He says, okay, I was there, but now I'm coming to the king. So he's very much aware that he's not a prisoner, and he requests these things. He requests what a person who's civilized understands needs to be done before you go to a king. So he doesn't lose himself. Yosef remains Yosef. And all that happened to him in jail is that he went through an experience, but that experience was only superficial and on the outside. So that if you saw Yosef in the jail, you would see a disheveled, decrepit looking young man, filthy. But that was the outside of Yosef. The inside of Yosef always remained Yosef. And Yosef, knowing that, when he came out, insisted, as they were hurrying him out, he's like, no, not so fast. You want me to interpret dreams? I want a haircut, I want a bath, I want a change of clothing. And they gave it to him, and then they brought him to power. So that also speaks about the capacity to survive is not just to survive, but to really never lose your identity, no matter what happens. And I think, again, this ties into what we were mentioning before, which is the idea that we can't lose ourselves because of a pandemic. We cannot lose, we cannot stop taking care of ourselves or stop caring about people that we care about. We have to continue doing and learning and engaging and growing, really, and growing from the experience. Now, there's a beautiful teaching that's found in Torah, which is a mystical Chabad teaching, which is this. I think it's from the Alter Rebbe, that when Joseph is taken out of jail, he demands that his clothes be changed. And so the Hasidic teachings say that if you look at Yosef, what was his strength? Yosef's strength was that he knew how to change his clothing. What does that mean, that he knew how to change his clothing? He knew how to leave experiences or to live experiences to separate his soul from the experience. So that when he was in jail, he never truly became a prisoner, no matter what he was wearing. When he came out of jail, he changed his clothing and he put his face forward as an advisor to Pharaoh, and he dressed that way. But who was he? Even when he was giving advice to Pharaoh, he was still Yosef. Later on, he changed his clothes again. He became a viceroy. He dressed like an Egyptian, but that was only his clothes. It wasn't who he really was. Who was he really? He stayed Joseph. So Joseph is this person who is able to leave experiences that were not really a reflection of who he was, and to keep it where it belonged on the outside, a change of clothing, not something that affected him personally or that changed him personally. So Yosef is a prisoner only in clothing. He becomes an advisor to the king only in clothing. He becomes the viceroy of Egypt only in clothing. One thing that Yosef always remains is he remains true to who he is. He never becomes defined by his experience. He never becomes defined by his environment. He knows how to keep his environment in his clothes. And that is a huge feat, because most people cannot do that. Most people become affected by their environment and they become what they do. They become where they are. Yosef was able to maintain a difference between who he was inside as Yosef and what he went through. And that's why he's called Yosef HaTzadik. And finally, we close this Torah portion with this very famous interaction that Yosef has with his brothers. When Yosef's brothers come to meet him in Egypt and they come to get food, Yosef recognizes them right away, but of course they don't, because they would never imagine in their wildest dreams that their brother who they sold into slavery ends up being viceroy of Egypt. And the Torah tells us, Rashi tells us that Yosef was a young man when they threw him into the pit. He was 17, he did not yet have a beard. Here it's many years later, he has a big beard and he's dressed, of course, in the Egyptian regalia. And the way they did their, I guess the way they wore their the way they did their makeup or whatever it was, the way the Egyptian pharaohs used to dress. So they never imagined that it's their brother. And Yosef puts them through the ringer. Yosef has them over for a meal, and he starts pretending that he's some kind of magician and that he knows that they have more family behind, and he asks them all kinds of questions. And at the end, what does Yosef do? He insists that his younger brother Benjamin has to be brought back down to Egypt. Now, why does he do this? For a whole myriad of reasons. One of them is to see his brother's loyalty. One of them to see is if his brother is going to treat Benjamin like the way they treated him, being that they were both from the same mother, Rachel. And then Joseph insists that Benjamin comes back. Benjamin comes back, they have a whole meal together. And at the end of the meal, what does Joseph do? He takes his goblet and he tells his servants to place his silver goblets in the sack of Benjamin. He gives them a lot of food and presents, and he sends them back to Israel. And right after they leave the city, he sends his troops after his brothers and say, someone stole the goblet of Joseph. And they look through all their brothers' packages, they can't find it, and they finally open Benjamin's bag. There is Joseph's goblet. And Joseph's goblet is in the bag. Benjamin is caught, so to speak, red-handed. And they are all brought back to the palace, and they're told that Benjamin is going to go to jail. And it's at this point that Judah, brother number 4, stands up, the one who sold Joseph into slavery, stands up and says, no, he is not going to jail. If need be, I'll go into jail, but not him. I promise my father, if you do this, you'll kill my father. So this is the sum total of this big Torah portion. And the question that's asked is, why does Joseph do this in this whole, this whole thing? So on a very basic level, he is really testing them. He's testing to see if they did tshuva. But on a mystical level, there is a deep teaching that I would like to share with you. And with this, we'll conclude the class. The Torah tells us that Yosef puts, and let's find the actual verse. Okay, just gonna get the verse in. Yosef put the goblets of he put his goblets, his silver goblets in the bag of Benjamin. Okay. All right. Okay, let me just find it. So they drink together with him, and they have the silver goblet. And let me just share this. Okay, so they have the silver goblet, and he tells his butler, fill the sack of these men, of my brothers, with food, and put a lot of money. And then he said, and put my goblet, the silver goblet, into the mouth of the sack of the youngest, and his purchase money. And he did that. And then the next morning, what happens? They chase Benjamin, and Joseph says to the overseer of the house, get up, pursue the men, and say, when you overtake them, say, why have you repaid good with evil? And is this not the cup that my master drinks from? Why, he even divines with it. You have done evil by the way you have acted, and he overtook them. Okay, so what he does is he plants this cup, the cup that Joseph drinks from, and he plants it in his bag. Now, if you look at the word that he has the silver cup, it says the esgivi givia hakesef, and my cup, that cup of silver. Now, in Hebrew, the word kesef means silver, but also the word kesef has the same etymological root as the word kisuf or kisufim, which means longing. And the mystical teaching of this exercise is this. Why does Joseph put a silver goblet into the cup, into the bag of Benjamin, his youngest brother? Because Joseph knew that in the history of the Jewish people, there would be great, great troubles. And as a result of the great troubles, the Jewish people will become despondent and disconnected from God. It'll be very hard to have kisufim. What's kisufim? Kisufim is a longing, a connection that is really emotional and deep-rooted. And he knew that they will have a difficulty having the kesef, the kisufim. So what does he do? He prepares a situation where they experience difficulty and overcome it. And as a result, it gives them hope for the future that they can overcome any difficulty in their life. And so Yosef does do this. He plants this cup in his brother's sack. And as a result, the Jewish people know that even when it seems that someone who is the viceroy or someone that you think is oppressing you is making your life hard, understand that at the end of the day, it could be your brother, meaning that it could be something very positive of this, and you will overcome. And mystically speaking, the goblet that's made out of silver is the metaphor for the longing that we should have for God. And the fact that this happens means that we can have a connection to God even when it seems that we've been set up and there's trouble. And what do people use a wine goblet for? We use it to drink wine. And in Tehillim it says, "V'yayin yismach levav enosh," and wine gladdens the heart of man, meaning that the purpose of wine is to make us joyous. So the purpose of Joseph's exercise with his brothers from the mystical perspective was to give them a preliminary experience that would create a reference point for them to know that even when everything seems to be wrong, even when it seems that the viceroy is harassing you and everything is dark and there is no redemption to be found, understand that even there, you have the capacity to have your silver cup. The silver cup represents a kisufim, a connection to God that is a longing and that is filled with wine, wine being the metaphor for having true joy. So that he presents this situation so that the Jewish people going through the long exile that they would go through would have the opportunity to find the capacity to have joy, true connection. And this was the exercise that he had to put them with. That is the very high mystical interpretation. On a very plain meaning, Joseph is really giving them an opportunity to correct their behavior that happened previously with him. That being said, there is something so meaningful and beautiful when we look at Joseph and his experiences with his brothers, where we see this idea that Joseph represents the capacity for perseverance during dark times. And not only does Joseph represent the capacity for perseverance, he also presents the rooting of the perseverance that we have as Jewish people for all times. So we take joy and we take strength and we take courage in the story of Joseph to know that Gam ze ya'avor, this too shall pass. And not only that in the darkest of moments, we can have wine, we can have true joy, and we can have true connection. We should not allow the difficulties that we are experiencing to mar the joy and the beauty that we have every single day by virtue of the fact that we're giving another day on this earth to have a connection with God, with Torah, with each other, and to do good in this world. So that is the lesson of Joseph, and that I thought was so moving as we are going through this journey together and trying to find courage and faith to meet the next day. So happy Hanukkah, everyone. And thank you for joining me. And again, we're going to do a Hanukkah special. I'm going to do a Hanukkah special sometime this week on the connection of Hanukkah to the feminine dimension and also to the women of Hanukkah, the lesser told story of Hanukkah. And so if you could just drop in the notes, if you could just drop when is a good time for you, and then I'll try to find the best time and do it then, because we don't usually have a class outside of Monday, but I figured for Hanukkah we should make that effort and just get into the holiday of Hanukkah on a deeper dimension, and hopefully this will give us all inspiration and joy and also knowledge about what this holiday means for us. So
thank you very much. Devorah, 11 o'clock on Wednesday, it's perfect.
Okay, so
Everybody, Wednesday 11, it's perfect.
okay, so if you could just tell me if Wednesday is good or if it's not Tuesday or Thursday.
Wednesday,
I'm
for me,
happy
it's only
to
Wednesday.
accommodate you my mornings.
They're all good. I'm good for any of them.
Okay.
Wednesday, it's perfect, and you
So
said
if you
11
have-
o'clock,
okay,
it's
if you have-
convenient.
okay.
That's your time.
Okay.
I think
so if-
Thursday is good for me, but that's
okay.
fine.
All right. If you can. Okay.
So you will send email to everybody, right, for Wednesday 11?
I
With
will
a Zoom.
send, yes, I will
Please,
decide,
you will
I will
send an
decide
email.
when I will do it, and then I will send an email when, yeah, I'm gonna look at everyone's comments, so please do tell me when is good for you and when is not good for you. If Wednesday is not good or Tuesday is not good, please let me know what day. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are the 3
Okay,
days that I can
Wednesday's
do it,
perfect.
and it, either way, whatever it is, I'll try to accommodate the majority, and this way we'll be able to continue studying in honor of Hanukkah, which is a holiday that we have to get to know on a more intimate level. So I'm happy to do that with you as well. So
Thank
I
you
wish
very much.
everyone a happy first day of Hanukkah, and may the joy of Hanukkah truly bring joy into our lives. And as our sages remind us very often, all we need is a little bit of light to dispel a lot of darkness. And as the Chabad rabbis would say, that darkness is not gotten rid of by chasing it away with a broom, but rather by opening the light. So let's open
Thank
up
you.
the lights in our hearts and in our families and in wherever we find in our environment. And when we open a light, what we do is we also open the light for others. So let's be joyful and let's be mindful and let's be in tune with the spirit of Hanukkah. And this will certainly give us a lot of blessing for ourselves and for our families. So happy Hanukkah, everyone. And I look forward to seeing you all.
Thank you very much. Devorah, can I
Yes,
pick up from
sure.
Wednesday afternoon
Thank
sometime?
you
Yes,
so much.
yes.
I'll say goodbye. That was
Okay.
beautiful. Like
Thank
usual.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Happy
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
So I will call you,
Thank
Devorah.
you,
Wednesday, I
Devorah.
will
Very
call you
timely
afternoon.
message. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you so
So
much.
wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Happy Hanukkah.
Thank you.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy
Happy
Hanukkah. Happy
Happy
Hanukkah.
Hanukkah. Happy Hanukkah.